Speaking of sides being exposed, episode 2 follows Mercedes, and the episode's called Bounce Back, which I think is a clever play on words, obviously, because they had such porpoising issues early on, but they did kind of get their stuff together and bounce back towards the latter part of the season. That's not a version of Toto Wolff that I'm used to seeing, right? Obviously, I think F1 and the personalities in it were gifted with the fact that they're pretty vulnerable in certain situations. Toto Wolff's used to having success at the highest level. Now, obviously, they've put together a car that, isn't performing to the best of its ability, and they're struggling. And so you can obviously see that bubbling of frustration. And Nate, you alluded to the team principal meeting where things get super heated and Toto Wolff's yelling. Christian Horner, of course, has a pretty great line in there, which I'm sure he knew. I'm sure all of them knew that the cameras were in there. But what did you kind of make of Toto Wolff's reaction and how he handled the struggles that were for Mercedes a season ago? And did you get that kind of sense from him, you guys, when you were around him during that time last season?
I think Toto, we've talked, haven't we, before about the different management styles between Red Bull and Mercedes. But I think that fundamentally, one of the reasons that Horner and Wolff are so successful is the way they, I think, better than any other team principal, will defend their team's kind of position. And you see that in that meeting really well. Toto's kind of coming in there and saying we need, for safety, because it was the race after Lewis had basically got out of the car and had all the back issues and stuff. And yeah, you're right. Horner's like, well, you should just fix your car, which is a bit cheeky to say, but at the same time, you can totally understand it from Horner's perspective, because he'd be like, okay, it was convenient that now this was what Red Bull were thinking at the time, is that it was convenient now that, now you're saying that these, the car's not safe because it's bouncing around. We've all managed to fix the issues, you haven't. At the same time, Mercedes, you can totally understand their point of view. They're like, well, look, if our driver's getting out of the car and he can barely stand up, something has to be done about it. But because of the situation between those two teams over the last few years and the animosity between those two guys, it's completely different. The context is gone. And I thought it was great. I mean, I'm so glad that bit was in the episode, because I was in Canada for the race, and speaking to Christian on the Sunday before he started the meeting, he was his post-race debrief. He was already talking to a couple of journalists from British newspapers. Came in and he was like, I really hope Netflix does show what we, this meeting we had the other day here, because he was like, I couldn't believe. And I thought, I was like, you always take that with a pinch of salt. You think, okay, well, it could just be Christian being Christian. It could not be as bad as it was. But you can see the faces of the other team bosses through that. They're just kind of like, wow, this is happening. And Domenicali's sitting there like, I don't know what to do. But I think it was great, because I think that shows you that for all of their talk, those two guys will kind of go toe to toe with each other like that in that situation, which
I feel like the roles were reversed too.
Yeah, and Horner
would be done.
Yeah, and Horner does allude to that as well, doesn't he? I forget the exact wording of it, but he says, when you've created a great car for so long and then you don't, suddenly, anxiety and doubt creeps in. And it's actually, the way he said that was the first time I ever thought that he showed sort of a degree of empathy for Toto's situation. He wasn't kind of lording that over him at that point. He was like, no, you can end up doubting yourself. You can end up doing that. And then there's like, I can't remember exactly what he says straight after that, but it's like he's back to like there's like the smile at the, it's smile in the corner of his mouth and stuff. So, he's enjoying the situation. And I think he's trying to not enjoy it enough that pisses Toto off. But yeah, to be honest with you, I could watch a whole show of just those two guys, like locked in a room together. I could also watch, just going back to what we talked about before, I could also watch a whole show of Mattia and Gunther just driving around Italy in a tiny car. So I think those two shows on their own, if it just went between those two things, you could have like the happiness of Gunther and Mattia, and then the tension and the unbearable kind of arguments between Toto and Christian. I think that alone would be a show that does just amazing ratings, because it's just really cool to see. Because again, when we ask them questions about this, often they're trying to play it down, or they're trying to shift the blame onto the other guy.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.